Thanks, guys. Welcome, everyone, to our OpenSim webinar. My name is Jennifer Hicks. I'm the OpenSim Research and Development Manager here at Stanford and also the Associate Director of our National Center for Simulation and Rehab Research. I'll be serving as the moderator for today's webinar. I'm pleased to welcome our presenters for today, Misag Mansouri from the University of Pittsburgh and Jeff Reinbold, who's joining us from the University of Tennessee. They will be presenting their webinar, Locus of Control, Are You in Control of Your Simulations? Before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit more about the OpenSim project and our webinar series. So if you can move me to the next slide. So OpenSim is a freely available software package that allows users to visualize musculoskeletal structures and then simulate movements of humans and animals or robots. The application includes tools for general purpose inverse dynamics, optimization so you can estimate muscle and joint forces, and methods to create simulations for motion capture. Then OpenSim also has tools so you can analyze and visualize the results of your simulations. So the first goal of our webinar series is to showcase the cutting-edge research that's being performed with OpenSim, like you'll hear about from Jeff and Misag today. OpenSim is also a large and geographically diverse community of users. So the second goal of our webinar series is to provide a platform so members of the OpenSim community can collaborate and communicate. Next slide. Before we get started, a few quick reminders about the webinar format. We definitely want to answer your questions, but we'll address those at the end of the presentation using the WebEx Q&A panel. If you need any additional technical help, you can consult the guide on our website. With that, now I'd like to introduce our speakers. So next slide. So our speakers today are first Misag Mansouri. Misag received his PhD in mechanical engineering from the University of Tennessee, and he's currently a postdoctoral associate at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. His research interests include muscle-actuated dynamic simulation, control system design, optimization, haptics, and human-machine interaction. Also joining us is Jeff Reinbold, who received his PhD in mechanical engineering from the University of Florida. He's currently an associate professor in the Mechanical, Aerospace, and Biomedical Engineering Department and the director of graduate studies for biomedical engineering at the University of Tennessee. Jeff's research interests include biomedical computation, simulation-based surgical and rehabilitation treatment planning, innovative patient-specific modeling, and optimization methods. So Jeff and Misag are both very active members of the OpenSim community, so we're excited that they're part of our webinar series now. Jeff completed a postdoc with our group here at Stanford. He's also an OpenSim fellow and a winner of a pilot project award from the NCSRR. Misag is a veteran of our OpenSim advanced user workshops as well. So with that, Jeff, Misag, we're excited to hear your talk. I'll let you take it away from here.
Okay, so I think I'm unmuted now. Thanks for the introduction, Jen, and good day to everyone, or evening, depending on where you are. I'd like to thank you guys for giving us the opportunity to present some of our research and hopefully teach others about it. And for those of you who don't know or haven't heard my voice before, I am Jeff Reinbold, and I'm excited to talk about some of the stuff we've been doing in developing an interface between OpenSim and MATLAB and really trying to apply some novel computational tools to study mechanisms of neuromuscular control, dynamics, and function for different tasks. So our long-term goal is to build on a foundation of these other software tools that you're well aware of to really better understand and predict, improve functional outcomes for individuals. So I want to start off by acknowledging our fellow researchers that really made this work possible. Without them, we couldn't do it. Misag and I recognize that we're only a few of the spokes in the research wheel, and these computational scientists and other biomechanists, along with the necessary funding, are really what keeps the wheel rolling. So it's rather easy to motivate to the OpenSim webinar crowd to use computer simulations in general, but why do we care about controlling our simulations, and particularly for controlling simulations of subject-specific movement? First, the long-term goal of simulation-based medicine is really to predict and ultimately improve functional outcomes, whether you're looking at analyzing athletic performance or designing safer working environments, or treating movement disorders. We may be interested in treating young children, movement disorders for young children with cerebral palsy, all the way up to the elderly adults surviving a stroke. And so current approaches actually allow us to simulate a recorded task, so some experimental task or experimental movement. It could be balance recovery, it could be sit to stand, or I'll give a shout out to Jill Higginson here, it could be post-stroke gait, and this is a simulation from her lab. So many of these tasks involve different disorders and motor control patterns. To achieve the long-term goal of simulation-based medicine and really predicting functional outcomes requires us to understand how appropriate muscle patterns control emotion for a particular task, whether the task is balancing on one foot during sports or walking on 2 feet despite a disability. So the simplest task I could think of for demonstrating the approaches that we want to talk to you about today was really just balancing on one foot while trying to reach your other foot out towards a soccer ball. So any type of control that we want to use for these simulations must take into account differences between subjects and really take into account reaction forces between the subject and the environment, which we're calling here supporting contact. So to be able to do this, we need to be able to impact and improve functional outcomes for different subjects, so we need to take into account these differences. To address these challenging research objectives, we really found it necessary to integrate some different software packages, which I'll tell you about, along with experiments in control system design. And really, over the next several minutes, we're going to cover some of the key concepts, as well as highlight some of the research that Misag and I were working on. So we want to end up here. We want to end up with a controllable simulation where we can place different subject-specific tasks on different parts of a model. And for example, this is just one task for the center of mass. So here I'm showing you an example of a closed-loop task-level control of movement that would produce for the task of balancing. So this particular task is to move the center of mass through different points, and these points are really highlighted with these orange spheres here, which you can see. And note that the center of pressure down here on the ground is actually moving along the base of support like you would expect, so it indicates that the model's foot is not welded to the ground. And a little bit closer look at the center of mass task, you can see that the center of mass progresses through these different points, these orange spheres, and you can see that the task accelerations are highlighted with this orange arrow, and these aren't actually forces that are applied to the model, but they're really accelerations that we desire for the center of mass to take, and Misag will give you more details about that in a little bit. The task accelerations, though, you can see actually really direct both the braking and the propulsion of the center of mass as we ask it to move through these different points. And so we're currently investigating the use of this primary task for generating subject-specific simulations. So now let's take a look at multiple tasks. So in this case, we have two tasks. One is balance, and one is to place the swing foot to some desired location, again, indicated by an orange sphere over the soccer ball. And when both tasks have the same priority, so here we're trying to do both at the same time, you can see that things begin to conflict and it doesn't end well. Here you notice that the ball is far enough away to make placing the foot over the ball really challenging. And so things start off pretty well, but as the head, arms, and trunk segment begin to lean over to compensate for reaching the foot out, you can see that that's good until we actually lose control and lose balance, and the stance foot does something you never want to see happen in the lab. So what we can do is we can prioritize these tasks and say, look, we always want to balance the model over the base of support, but also try to reach towards the soccer ball. And so now the center of mass task has a priority of 1, and then the swing foot task has a lower priority of 2. And you can see that, again, the head, arms, and trunk segment begins to lean over to compensate for the swing foot kind of reaching out to the side or laterally. But what you see is the swing foot remains well above the soccer ball here, because we're requiring that the center of mass cannot drop any lower than where it started. But again, there's this excessive lean with the head, arms, and trunk segment. So what if we want to get rid of that? Well, what we can do is then add a third task to the mix. And so here we have a posture task, and it has a lower priority than the other two I described. And so here you see the head, arms, and trunk segment. We want the center of mass for this segment to really remain above the whole body center of mass as much as possible. And as a result, you can see that the swing foot can't quite reach the soccer ball, and the head, arms, and trunk segment has these task accelerations, which are trying to keep it upright or keep the posture upright. So we're currently investigating using these different tasks and really different prioritizations of the tasks for generating subject-specific simulations of balance recovery. So Jen welcomed everyone, and I really tried to start to motivate to this crowd why we should care about controlling the simulations. But as an outline for the rest of the talk, I will go ahead and give you an overview, really a conceptual overview of the computational framework we've been developing. And then Misag will go ahead and give you some additional details, really dive under the hood with his own research where he was investigating balance recovery. And then he'll wrap things up with some research challenges and future work related to this framework. Hopefully this will spark some interesting discussion and some questions from you guys where we can really dive into more of the details and have an interactive discussion about the modeling and the biologically inspired control and dynamic simulation. So I'll start off with this interface that we developed between OpenSim and MATLAB. And in this section, what I want to do is give you an overview of how a closed-loop forward dynamic simulation can be generated in Simulink, but using OpenSim, or really an OpenSim model, as the plant or a block in Simulink. So why do we care about MATLAB and OpenSim? Well, MATLAB, really specifically Simulink, has many advantages. It's really a popular software package with many different integrators to choose from. And many researchers are already comfortable with the graphical user interface for controlling a dynamic simulation. However, this package is quite limited when you consider resources for generating and really analyzing biomechanical simulations, really those involving neuromusculoskeletal systems. So this brings us to OpenSim. OpenSim is a popular software package with many different algorithms and actuators and analyses that are really designed for these types of systems. And the OpenSim graphical user interface really provides many different tools for modeling these biomechanical systems and really analyzing the simulations themselves. However, this package is limited in resources for rapid model-based design of control algorithms. And so these facts, along with many conversations from researchers such as those already acknowledged, as well as others like Ton van den Bogert and Marco Ackerman, really led us to developing a MATLAB system function that would combine the strengths of both software packages. So let's take a look at this new interface. Every Simulink block has a set of states, and by states what we mean is everything variable about a block. Okay, so the concept of a state of a system is really used extensively in any kind of time domain analyses, which you consider a simulation to be. The state variables are used in equations that describe the dynamics of the system and really provide some future state. So what's going to happen in a long time. So mathematically, it's a set of first-order differential equations. MATLAB really considers these states to be anything, or includes all of the things in any runtime data that can change after the simulation starts. For OpenSim models, states are really joint angles and joint speeds, muscle activations, muscle fiber lengths, among other things. And so in addition to the states, we really care about the inputs. So what is the input coming into the block and what is the output after we integrate some state derivatives? So for us in writing this interface between OpenSim and MATLAB, we were really interested in looking at what are the state derivatives from an OpenSim model, and then how can we integrate those to get some observed movement or some simulated movement. So we can lay the basics of OpenSim forward dynamics over an illustration of the Simulink block. And so here you see there's a number of transformations that occur labeled in these orange blocks now, which are OpenSim components over the blue block, which was the Simulink block. But you can see there's a number of transformations that occur between the input, the neural control, and then the output, which would be the observed movement. So in addition, there's a number of files. If you're running OpenSim from GUI or from the command line, there's a number of files that you also have to include for forward dynamics, whether they're controls files. So what are the muscle excitations or controls for different actuators? And you obviously have to have an OpenSim model file as well. So we need to include these in OpenSim forward dynamics as well. And so now what we can do is in MATLAB, we can have the Simulink signal actually serve as an input for the controls. So over here on the neural command side, Simulink can serve as the input and then use the MATLAB suite of integrators over here on the right-hand side to actually integrate the state derivatives. So to achieve this task, we needed to write the interface really in a way to allow Simulink to communicate with OpenSim, for all the parts that were in between the input and that numerical integration. So of course, if you already had a forward dynamic simulation in OpenSim, you could still use the same files that you had generated to help the Simulink simulation along as well. So the most powerful part, really the most interesting part for this webinar, it really comes from the fact that we can provide feedback. And so we can close this loop with the input controls. And so we can compute an error between some desired movement, and Misag will go into more details about that, and some simulated movement. So what are we seeing happen in Simulink? And then we can develop a controller that we're able to reduce that error between the desired and the simulated movement, and use that to change the input signal, again, all done within the Simulink interface. So in summary, we combined strengths of OpenSim and MATLAB and Simulink, and really extended the open loop forward dynamics that you may be familiar with already by providing some closed loop control. And then hopefully where this is ending up is this interface can enable these neuromusculoskeletal simulations to actually use feedback control and investigate different control algorithms that can be used for improving functional outcomes. So I wanted to take a minute and give you some of the concepts for generating predictive simulations. I know there's been a few different types of presentations that you may have seen for predictive simulations, but in the context that we're talking about, in this section, I really want to go over how we can start to refine and alter this feedback loop that I introduced you to be able to generate new motions. And so moving toward using predictive simulations for simulation-based medicine, there are really two broad areas where we can start to change this feedback loop. First, we can make changes on the model side, the musculoskeletal model side, or on the OpenSim side of things, where we can simulate different surgeries or rehabilitations, tendon transfers, strengthening exercises, any kind of body weight support, orthotics. And there's many other physical treatments that we can simulate on this side. And then the second, we have the closed loop controller side of things. So on the Simulink side, we can simulate spasticity, nerve transfers, functional electrical stimulation, and really many other aspects of motor control and rehabilitation that we may be observing in the lab. So we quickly found when we started to make these kind of changes and try to predict new motions that really matched what a certain person was doing, that lower level controllers did not work. We have a paper out on stretch reflex controllers for balance recovery, but we quickly learned that we couldn't really go much beyond that. So we moved up to a high-level task controller, where our objective was to really merge different approaches from the literature, from both biomechanics and robotics, into one platform. So biomechanics gives us a number of tools on the one hand, and you may be familiar with some of these. In general, biomechanics has really specific subjects, right? We can take a person in the lab and measure their experimental movement, and so then we have subject-specific models that we can generate of that person or create for that person. There's the inverse dynamics problem, where we have to solve the muscle redundancy problem, more muscles than degrees of freedom. And then there's several different algorithms already out there for tracking joint kinematics, or you may be doing an open loop optimization study. And so you may not be as familiar on the robotics side of things with the different approaches, but there are some similarities in that they have humanoid robots with different degrees of freedom. They have a lot of literature already out there about whole body control frameworks, with and without supporting contacts or those ground reaction forces. And then where we really keyed in on was the task prioritization part and closed loop task level control. So within this interface that I described to you, what we did is write the code to combine these different approaches and really create a platform for future research. And so although experimentally we would typically recruit a subject up here and then measure their movement and perform the biomechanics or use those tools, or you may create a robot and then create the controller for that robot. What we're going to see in the next several slides is actually the flow of information is going to go in a counterclockwise direction here. And so so let me just give you some main parts before I pass it off to Misag. So what we can do is we can take a dynamic simulation of a model, of a musculoskeletal model from the biomechanics side of things. And then we can look at the resulting motion. And typically this model and the simulated motion would have to represent some motion capture data from a particular subject. But what we've been working on in our case is the experiment is used to really inform the simulation about what was the subject trying to achieve? What set of particular tasks was the subject trying to achieve? And then what we've been investigating is this use of surrogate response surfaces to establish relationships between tasks in this block here. And then that information can be used along with the simulated motion. We can compare the desired task to what do we think the subject was doing along with what is Simulink outputting for the simulated task, and then get that error that we want to minimize. And then work on creating different controllers for minimizing that error. And because we are simulating a biological system, so humans in this case, we can introduce a delay. So we can get some delayed set of reference task accelerations here. So where do we want the person to go, or what accelerations do we want them to have? And then within the OpenSim and MATLAB interface here at the bottom, we can combine those different approaches from robotics and biomechanics. So we have operational space control from robotics, which says if you want me to move with some task acceleration, what joint torques are necessary to create that acceleration. And then given those joint torques, we can use the biomechanics tools to break things down to the muscle level. And so that was really my conceptual overview, and I wanted to pass it off to Misag, but I think when we did the practice, there's a bit of a transition here. Misag is going to run his slides from his machine. So as Joy switches over, you guys might not see anything, but hopefully you can still hear me. And then we'll see if Misag's presentation pops back up. So Misag should start sharing his presentation, and then you guys will hear him talk. Yep, there you go.
So hello everyone. I hope you guys can hear me. Hello everyone. First,
I hear you, Misag.
Okay, that's great. First, I would like to thank the webinar organizer, especially Jane and Joy, for this opportunity. For those of you I have not met before, my name is Misag Mansouri, and I was fortunate enough to work with Jeff as his PhD student back in the University of Tennessee. I really thank Jeff for covering the first part of this webinar. Made my job much easier. In this part, I'm going to talk about an application of our OpenSim MATLAB interface that Jeff already explained, and how can we use it in our predictive simulation of human movement. So our closed loop simulation paradigm that Jeff actually showed you the overall big picture about it is consisted of 4 major parts, which kind of like start from the biomechanics in the bottom right corner, and we have the subject-specific data, and then we close this closed loop paradigm with some control system and some robotic formulation to generate those generalized force that we need to running our forward dynamic simulation. So as Jeff also explained in previous section, we created an interface in MATLAB for communicating with OpenSim API for generating forward dynamic simulations. We use this code to tie the robotic approaches with what we were doing in OpenSim already. So let's start with something that we are all familiar with. So this is our musculoskeletal model that we use in our simulation. We start with the generic OpenSim model, and we tweaked it based on our application. Our model here had 21 degrees of freedom, and mostly lower extremity, and we had 92 muscle actuators. So I want you guys to look at this green arrows on the foot-ground contact. So there's no attachment between the foot and ground. There's a contact modeling that is being done through OpenSim Hunt and Crossley spheres to generate those ground reaction, realistic ground reaction forces. And this is required for most of the predictive simulation because we don't really have access to all the experimental data, and we want to be able to generate those ground reaction forces to hold our models. The next part that Jeff also talked about it is our 3 different tasks that we defined. So in our specific application or example of a single leg balance, we came up with 3 different tasks that we can define in order to balance our models and get them to do whatever we wanted. We started with the primary task, which is the center of mass task, basically keeping the center of mass over the base of support, and we have some secondary tasks such as swing foot task and the head and torso task. So this is part of like the modeling part of our platform. Going toward our subject specific, we actually, the next step was we want to combine some of those experimental data that we can get as a reference to our controller. So what we did, with the help, a great help of our collaborator, Dr. John Donnelly from University of Western Australia, and Joss and Mark Robinson, and from University of Liverpool, John Moores at United Kingdom, they collected this data for us. We use this Karen platform, which is a computer-assisted rehabilitation environment. Basically, it's a steward platform that we can it can translate in different with 6 degrees of freedom on the ground floor. So we used 2 young adults, 1 male and 1 female. We collected marker trajectories and ground reaction forces and electromyography for 8 muscle on the stance leg, and support surface perturbation were randomly triggered in different directions. We have data collected for interior, posterior, medial, lateral, and diagonal, and the magnitude of those translation was 6 and 12 centimeters with the maximum device velocity. So unlike many other biomechanical applications and studies that have been done before, we're not trying to track any specific kinematic or tracking the marker set that we collected from the Karen system. We actually use those kinematic as a reference to our defining our biological tasks. So, and I'm going to go through some more definition of what I mean by these tasks, and I showed you. So we introduced different tasks. So our primary task was keeping the balance for model to stand up and keeping the center of mass of the whole body over the base of support, which here is shown by the vector V1. And then we also defined some secondary tasks such as V2, the swing leg position, and the head and torso center mass position on the on our model. So these are all the information we got from our experimental data. And what we wanted to do, we actually wanted to find this relationship between the secondary task vectors V2 and V3 with respect to our primary tasks, and we plot those experimental data points to show this relationship with each other. The next step, we use surrogate response surface. Basically, we fit these surfaces over our experimental data as a reference to our controller. Now we have these surfaces that cover up most of all these working space, and we can define, map our experimental data onto those surfaces. And these surfaces actually were used as a reference to our controller. So in order to control the error between the simulated task and our desired task, we had to use a tracking controller, or we call it, or a feedback controller. Here we use the simple PID controller, which you can tune the gains for your purposes, but the error signal value, the input to the controller, was basically the error between your desired task that we get from these surrogate surfaces and your simulated task relationship. So in addition, because we are simulating humans here, looking back to the literature, there's a time delay that's going on. It's about 60 milliseconds delay that we added. And the output of the controller here, we're going to get the delayed reference task acceleration. So we're going to get some kind of acceleration output from these controllers, but it's all obviously delayed to represent the human neuromechanical process delay. So the last part of the controller is actually, now that we have these reference accelerations, how can we use those and to generate our task forces? So here there's a relationship. I'm not going to go, I don't want anybody to lose sight of the big picture here, and I'm not going to go through details of the equation, but basically what we have, these task forces, these are related to the reference acceleration multiplied by the some inertia term. All of these dynamic terms here are support consistent, which basically means that our dynamic knows about our contact modeling, and we also had the terms for velocity and gravitational term. These all add up together and give us these task force. And many of these matrices, such as the inertia matrices, the mass matrices, velocity and gravitational term, you can actually get it directly from OpenSim API with the nice work that Mike Sherman did, and we have access to many of these matrices. We just need to do some algebra, add them together. So basically, because we have 3 tasks here, we're gonna end up creating these 3 task vectors, which are basically a virtual task forces that is necessary for causing the desired task acceleration. So now we come up with these 3 task forces that we also showed it in the videos that earlier that Jeff showed. And how do we go from these task force to our operation to our generalized forces? It's a block, we call it operational spice controller. So basically, again, there are a lot of equation. It's nothing to scare about, and it's basically there is a mathematical relationship between your task force and your total torque joint or your generalized forces. The task force are getting multiplied by the Jacobian transpose of the task is going to give you those required joint torques. There's other terms here which I'm going to talk about it. It's called the prioritized multitask actuation. Basically, so here, think about it, we define 3 different tasks, and the first task was center of mass, the second task was swing leg. How do we guarantee that the secondary tasks are not interfere with your primary task? So the way to do that is a mathematical way of doing that in the robotic literature, which you basically put the secondary task on the null space of your previous task or the primary task. That way they don't really result in extra acceleration on those tasks. So coming out of the robotic module, so from those 3 tasks that we inputted here, we get 21 torques or the generalized forces, in our case, joint torques, output from our robotic modules. And then these torques, then what we wanted to do, we wanted to convert them to our muscle activations, or in order to do that, similar to the static optimization, what we needed to do in here, the optimization, it's a redundant problem. So the optimization seeks to minimize the muscle activation squared, which is basically the reduced metabolic cost for each muscle within the design variable bound of 0, 1. So the muscle activation cannot get lower than negative, and it cannot get lower than 0, and the top fully activated muscle has a 1 bound. In the end, so after this part is done, you basically have converted your torques to muscle forces through these muscle moment arms and the optimization that you use to do that. And then these muscle forces actually going to feed into your forward dynamic, which I didn't talk here, but there's a forward dynamic. So this is almost like an OpenSim forward dynamic loop that you input some muscle forces into your model with all these complexities that I talked about, and you get some motion out of those. So this is the whole closed loop. Jumping into some of the results, as you can see here, so I want to show some of these surrogate response surfaces that we had. So here I only showed one of the secondary tasks here, which is the swing leg for one of the subjects, and you can see these, you can create these plots of these surrogate surface for each subject, and as you may notice, there are different surfaces for each subject, and that's one of the importance of this way of presenting the experimental data, which we can come up with new plots and surfaces to represent different subject strategies in controlling balance, or if they're using more of their swing leg to reject the disturbances, or if they're using more head and torso. And some of the videos that I have for you, in the first part, you see the subject 1. These are all purely simulations, actually. The results. You can see in this case, on the subject 1, the platform actually moving forward, and you can see how the ground reaction forces and the center of pressure changes under the foot contact on the green arrows. On the orange arrows, you can see all the 3 tasks that we use, the subject used to balance on a single leg. We have the similar one on the second subject. This time the platform is moving backward, but you can see like there are different strategies, slightly different strategies, but what is important then, all these 3 tasks are involved in this balance. And to kind of go back to how well this controller did, here I showed the kinematic differences. The green models actually are the actual subject, the actual experimental kinematics on the platform, and the blue one is our simulated results. And you can see, even though you may see there are differences, especially in some of the swing foot and torso, the center of mass are really closely match each other because that's the primary task. And you can see, even though the bodies are in different positions, the center of mass almost on top of each other. So, but we were happy about seeing these results because we only use 3 tasks to relate our kinematics with our different tasks. So to kind of summarize this part of the task level part, so we merged these approaches from biomechanics and robotics to address the required gap in modeling and simulation of biomechanical system. As you may notice, this closed loop actually gives us a lot of room for tweaking these biomechanical systems. And we use the contact modeling, which is another useful feature of OpenSim software that researcher may be used, especially if you're doing predictive simulation, that in case you didn't have the ground reaction force available or recorded, you can use some of these real contact modeling simulation for your predictive simulation. And then we use surrogate response surfaces in this part to relate the experimental task vectors to our simulation result and as a reference to our tracking controller. Also the other features of this task level controller was the prioritized task, which basically how do you decide between which task is more important and which task has the highest priority. This is also something is very important, and it could be changed and improved in many aspects and different application of this task-based controller. So with that, I also like to go through some of the challenges and opportunities that we have to improve this work. There are research challenges and future work in every area of the approaches I have shown you today. For a specific quadrant, if I want to show you for example, what we can improve in our subject specific and motion capture setup, we can think about what are the desired tasks, and we're currently investigating this, and we think this is where the largest leap can be made. We can think about establishing task and task prioritization for different movement, and or define motor control circuit for lower priority task as a function of higher priority task variables. So in the control aspect of our simulation, we can also improve some part, and there's room for future development. We can think about, obviously, the PD controller is not the only choice for these type of simulation, but more important than that is also can we integrate perception. For example, can we talk about how can we teach our model how to know about the ground or decision processes? Can they switch between the priority of the task for example, on fly during the simulation, and if the task priority is going to change during the simulation. So, and also there's tuning. This controller could be subject-specific gains that we can use for this controller that can improve that part of the controller as well. In the robotic part, I can think about how we can make these equations and controller actually more physiological. We can add some constraints such as joint limit based on human physiology to make these robotic type controller more act like a brain. We can also establish the subject-specific generalizable type of task for different movements. So if we have a set of tasks for running, and we have some set of tasks for walking and jumping, can we generalize any of those tasks and understand how these subjects reacting either of those situation and application. In the biomechanic part and optimization part, it would be useful to have some type of controller that you can directly go through to your general muscle excitation, something similar to the CMC, or better yet, some of the work that AJ did on the NMT algorithm that we can get directly to our excitation. Another approach we can improve on this part is adding some lower level reflex controller in our simulation. So that's all, and also useful that we can kind of like going through studying different problems, investigating spasticity and all those. And the other part that we can be improved is the contact modeling. Can we have subject and trial-specific contact force parameters for each of the subjects? So these are all the parts that there's room for research, but kind of to wrap up this webinar, our long-term goal of simulation-based research is to predict and ultimately improve the functional outcome. And we integrated here different fields of studying. A lot of you might be in biomechanics or experimental biomechanics, and with the control and robotic for studying control of human movement and doing some kind of predictive simulation. So we use these surrogate response surfaces, and these surrogate response surfaces, I think it's important because we can use them to analyze subject-specific movement and even trying to figure out these motor control patterns. And so these task level simulation can be used to predict movement in subjects with different disorders as well, and ultimately improve functional outcome. If you have for more information, I would recommend you go through Jeff Research website, rrg.utp.edu. We have also a dedicated page to our OpenSim MATLAB project that you can download the interface and start tweaking with it. If useful, you can email either me or Jeff for more information. We can add you to the project web page that way you can have access to the source code. And with that, I just want to thank you all for attending this webinar and the organizers. And me and Jeff would be happy to take your questions.
All right, thanks Misag and Jeff for a great talk. Now we'll get started with the Q&A session. So all the questions will be text-based, so go ahead and find the Q&A box in your WebEx controls. Should be on the bottom right of your screen. And then type in your question and make sure you select to ask all panelists. And so while we're waiting for those questions to come in, I'll go ahead and ask one. So you mentioned as an area of future work, something you're interested in is looking at subject and trial-specific contact parameters. I was wondering how you would determine what those parameters would be and what the benefits would be of having those subject-specific parameters.
So yes, that's some of the problem with the contact modeling, that sometimes in order to get to match those experimental ground reaction forces, you need to have better contacts modeling parameters such as the stiffness and viscosity terms and all those, and it could be really depending on the experiment. If, for example, the subject wearing which type of shoes they're wearing, are they barefoot, and which kind of like ground floor they're standing on. So there are a lot of those features that could be used, and it would be nice to have some kind of a tuning algorithm that we can go through that and match those experimental ground reaction forces.
Okay, thanks, Misag. Jill Higginson has a related question about the surrogate response surface contact modeling. So first she says, really impressive work. And then can you clarify what the surrogate response surface represents? Is this the range of possible solutions and thus the optimization search space, or something else?
Yeah, I can take that for Jill. So I think she's talking about the task response surfaces, or what we thought the subjects were trying to do with their center of mass and their swing foot. And so it really is a range, Jill, in that you know when we want to ask the model to do a specific task, we have to give it some desired task. And what we were trying to do is set up these relationships between tasks, and that's what the surface represents. So Misak, maybe can you go back to one of those slides where I think it was slide 30? I think it was slide 30 that had the response surface. Yeah, and so what you can see there is on the floor. It's really the primary task is represented by the floor of that three-dimensional space, and then only one component of the secondary task, the vertical component of the swing foot, is represented in the height of that plot. And so what you can see is as you ride along that surface of where the center of mass is, where the primary task is, it gives you a location of a desired for the swing foot. And so it really is a range of motion, and it's something that if you did enough experiments, and this is where you would come in, Jill, is if you did enough experiments, you could really have more than just one surface, right? You could almost have like a volume of possible solutions for that secondary task for V2Y, and then when they're moving around on their base of support, you would know where you want to search for that secondary task. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So I guess, Jill, you can follow up if you have any additional questions. But we'll move to a question from Vijay Fergley now. First, he says, really great presentation and technical developments. And then, do you have, first, a good journal article that summarizes these methods in greater detail? And two, one or more sample models on simtk.org that people can use to learn how to get started with these methods on their own?
So, I mean, I can respond to that one. Thanks, BJ, for the question. So this part of our work is actually not published yet. Some part of it using the interface is published, and we have like some predictive simulation with the stress reflex controller, which recently got published in Gait and Posture. But this part we actually is thinking more computational type of journals for the actual method and the robotic implication in OpenSim, and then maybe some more clinical journals such as Journal of Biomechanics for the surrogate surface representation of all those tasks. And I think I'm missing the second part of the question. Can you repeat that second part?
The second part of the question was whether there are one or more sample models on simtk.
Oh yeah. So we have the source code for the interface, and some of the simpler example in our simtk repository. We did not share all the task level simulation on our simtk website yet because it's going under publication, but we have different version of the OpenSim interface and some basic example for like balance of upper extremity and lower extremity that they can use to get started with. And we can definitely talk about more in detail if they contact us for sharing some of the other part of the.
And the only thing I would add is that it is so new in finding these relationships between tasks. I mean, we've just picked some really big ones here, which you can still see on the screen, between the center of mass and the end effector of the swing foot. But there may be many other tasks, many other relationships between joints and things like that. So to answer BJ's question, it's not published yet because we still don't know what task priority is the right one. We think we have it figured out for balancing on one foot, but when it comes to stepping, if somebody have a learning that takes place, they're on the Karen platform and their response surface looks like this when they're not stepping, but when they first start, their response surface may look completely different, and they were forced to take a step. So yeah, I don't think that it's published yet because of that. We don't know.
All right, thanks, guys. let's see, I'll give another minute or two for other questions to come in. Yeah, so figuring out how a person is optimizing to balance different tasks and other motions is obviously a really hard problem. Do you have ideas on how you would extend this framework to stepping or some other, or jumping or some other non-balanced task?
Yeah, so that's currently what we're working on. So Misak, of course, left me and went off to his postdoc. But what we're doing now is really towards stepping. So if you can maintain your balance, right, on your stance foot, that's part of gait. And then if you can get the swing limb to go where you want it to go, that's part of gait. And so the first step would be to get really the placement of that swing limb to be in the right place to really control the center of mass location. So what I envision really is a set of response surfaces for different tasks. So if you're just trying to stand and balance, there's one set of response surfaces and you're in a certain mode. But then if you go to transition to gait, you would obviously switch.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now we have some more questions, related questions from BJ and Jill. So first, BJ's question. For defining tasks, it appears that you currently define the task interdependencies using response surfaces that represent positions. Is that understanding correct, or are you using velocities and accelerations as well to represent the response surfaces?
Yeah, so the response surface, definitely what we've shown you here is the positions of that end effector for the swing limb. And then the task 3 was the position of the center of mass of the torso. Those do get converted into task accelerations though at the dynamics level. So what we're trying to figure out is what are the joint torques to get that center of mass into a certain position and into a desired position. So yeah, the response surfaces, if I had to put units on those axes, it would definitely be position units.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and now we'll take a last question from Jill. So when closed loop control is enabled, will the models run forward indefinitely? And how fast is the integrated interface?
So I guess to answer this question, it's basically you can define how long your simulation want it to be. So we can run simulation for example, there's a place that you can assign. For example, you want to run a 10-second simulation or 5-second simulation. The simulation, the forward dynamic itself, is relatively fast. It's faster than running forward dynamic in OpenSim, and the reason for that is they're using some kind of MATLAB integrators to do those integration inside. But when you add all the complexity of the contact modeling, and part of this closed loop, we also have the static optimization also. So if you do only the torque actuator, it's relatively really fast, like simulation, under a minute for 5-second simulation. But when you added the optimization part to go from those joint torques to muscle forces, then that would add some extra time, but still it's in a really well-defined time, and it's in the order of a couple of minutes, not a couple of days. So.
And the other thing to add to that is Joe was asking about, will they run indefinitely? And they will if you set the end time to the simulation long enough. What I think you're thinking of is a normal forward dynamic simulation is very unstable, right? It can fall over or trip or something like that. And what we've been looking at is a way of designing these controllers so that doesn't happen. And so, yeah, you could have the simulation run indefinitely.
That's fine.
All right. So I think with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. If you guys can bring up those last couple closing slides. So again, thank you, Misak and Jeff, for a great talk, and thanks to the audience for the great questions and great discussion. So next slide, I believe. So I want to acknowledge our funding sources for OpenSim in the webinar series and the NCSRR. So we're supported by several grants from the NIH, including an NIH grant that funds our National Center for Simulation and Rehab Research. Next slide. So you can find more information about the center, OpenSim, upcoming events, and other resources on our website, opensim.stanford.edu. And please fill out the survey that will appear in a pop-up window at the conclusion of the webinar. So thanks again to everyone, to our great presenters and the audience. We hope you'll continue to stay involved with OpenSim. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.